so much for coming out tonight, both in person and on Zoom. Tonight, we're going to be continuing a series called Wild Maine in partnership with the Center for Wildlife Studies. And this is going to be recorded and posted on the Camden Public Library YouTube channel. If you have questions, the Zoom audience can type it into the chat with a Q&A, and I'll read it out loud after the presentation. And now to tell us a little bit about the Center for Wildlife Studies, I'll introduce the president, Jack Hopkins. So over to you, Jack.
Thank you, Julia. Before I introduce Rosie tonight, I'd like to say a few words about CWS and our partnership here with Camden Public Library called Wild Maine. CWS is a Maine-based nonprofit organization whose mission is to provide accessible environmental education worldwide. And in addition to that, we promote wildlife conservation through our research. In addition to conducting research here at home and around the world, our faculty and staff train students in all sorts of different kinds of disciplines related to ecology, natural resource management, environmental science, conservation. We believe the best contribution we can make to wildlife conservation in the world is educating the environmental leaders of tomorrow, regardless of their financial position. Today, we're continuing our community education partnership with the Camden Public Library, as I said, called Wild Maine. The purpose of the program is to educate our community about the amazing natural resources that we have here in Maine and to let you know how you can get involved, right, throughout the state. Following a talk, please consider supporting our mission and this free program by giving a tax-deductible donation to our organization, Center for Wildlife Studies. And please read about us on our website. Thank you to Whitflea, who's currently our primary sponsor, and thank you to their representative, Greg Domarecki, who's in the audience with us today. Now it's my pleasure to welcome Rosemary Seton, the Marine Mammal Stranding Coordinator at Allied Whale at the College of the Atlantic. Rosie's responsible for coordinating the rescue, stabilization, and transport of distressed marine mammals, conducting necropsies, obtaining biological samples, training volunteers, and educating the public through lectures and trainings and interviews. Rosie earned a master's degree in Marine Mammal Science at the University of St. Andrews, Scotland, studying humpback whales in the Gulf of Maine. Earlier on in her master's education, she also studied blue whales in Newfoundland and Labrador. Today, Rosie's talk will be about marine mammal stranding responses from Rockland to Calais, the northeastern coastal half of Maine, which comprises Allied Whale's response region. She'll talk about the various marine mammal species we see here and what to do when you spot a seal ashore. Take it away, Rosie. Thank you.
I was kind of in my own world. I was like, that sounds so good.
It's gonna go on forever.
Going. Thanks, Jack. Thank you for being here tonight. It's really nice to be in front of people again. I got thinking about that. It's been 3 years. So this is a real pleasure. And I know we've got a virtual audience out there, and thank you for attending tonight as well. My title, it started out as being stranded, just stranded. And then I thought, I'm going to put a question mark on there, make it stranded, as in, is it stranded or not? We're going to talk about that a little bit. But basically, I'm looking at stranding response in Northeastern Maine, and why Northeastern Maine, as Jack mentioned, it is our response region at Allied Whale. We look after Rockland up to the Canadian border. To begin with, I do want to say Allied Whale, the College of the Atlantic, would like to honor and acknowledge the Penobscot and Wabanaki nations who have occupied this land for thousands of years, including the Penobscot Nations, land upon which the College of the Atlantic sits and lies, that of Mount Desert Island. And those couple of nice images of the campus in Bar Harbor. All right, Allied Whale, we're a whale research group, started back 51 years ago. Our hallmark really is humpback whale photo ID. And there's a couple of photos there to the right of a humpback named Whistler. We learned or found that by matching up the markings on the underside, you could identify individuals. And we've done that for years. I'm not going to go into that. That's a whole lecture or more unto itself. We also have our field research station, Mount Desert Rock, 25 miles offshore. It has an old lighthouse on it and lightkeeper station. And we use it as a base for doing our whale research, but also seal research and oceanographic research as well, and acoustic research. But I'm going to talk about marine mammal strandings. That's the other sort of other component, or one of the other components to allied whale. As I mentioned, we're responsible for the basically down east region. And of course, Camden being part of our region. This is a real pleasure to be able to speak tonight, because I may be coming after you to go check on some seals for me. All right, just a few things. I just sort of threw this together, I thought, what was I going to talk about? And of course, I'll talk, what is a stranding, but being out of habitat, how do we know if an animal is stranded or not, especially for seals? Why do we respond to them in the first place? I'll talk about the stranding network, a bit about species, especially about some of our summer seals. I think of them as summer seals, grays and harbors. A few things to keep in mind about seals that have cropped up over the years that I've gleaned from phone calls and talking to people, sort of misconceptions about these animals. And also look at what a healthy seal looks like and normal behaviors. That's a whole other talk and assessment, but just some brief things to talk about there. And then I'll finish up with some cetacean, and cetacean is just simply whales, dolphins, and porpoises, collectively known as cetaceans. And then, of course, some harbor seal cases, since harbor seal pupping time is basically on us right now. We haven't had our first call yet, but last year, our first call, I think, was April 28th. So 'tis the season. All right, so what is a stranding? Basically, it's when a marine mammal is out of habitat, which for whales is pretty clear cut, and I'll get to that in a sec. But as you can see, some of these seals aren't in the really very happy place. I got one in the lower left by a truck, not a good place to be. And we have this harp seal in the top right, the entrance to the Scudic section of Acadia National Park one winter. It had crossed the road, come back across the road again, and decided that the side of the road was pretty nice. We just needed to do an assessment, found it was a nice healthy seal, and just kind of chivied him back to the water, which if you could look to the left of that photo, about 30 feet there is the down to the waterfront, which goes into Frenchman Bay. So out of habitat depends if you're a seal or a whale. This, I think, is pretty straightforward. Whales, dolphins, porpoises cannot be on land. They're not ambulatory on land. They are not meant to be there. They're heavier, especially the larger whales. They can crush their internal organs. The other thing is that they don't have any fur, so they are prone to sunburn if they are left on shore like this. Freshwater, you do get some whales coming up areas, and I'll talk about humpback whale that went to my hometown of Montreal, which was really odd. Although we do get the odd whales up there, but this was the first. And it looks like being in fresh water for too long may affect their skin. That's still not well understood at this point. And I will say that there are actually 4 species of freshwater dolphins that do just fine. And this is just to show that this Atlantic white-sided dolphin, our colleague, my colleagues rescued and was deemed in good shape with help from our friends at IFA and Cape Cod, who do a lot with mass stranded animals, and was released and swam off. Thankfully, we didn't have it restrand. That is always something that you got to watch out for. This was ended up being a stranding that was not so obvious. And I say that because actually I was at a sea turtle conference in West Virginia, and I had the stranding phone, and this call came and said, well, there's this minke whale that's come into a cove in Deer Isle. And I thought, okay, well, we do get minke whales, which is a kind of baleen whale. It is not a toothed whale. You do have the 2 different groups of whales, ones that have teeth, the ones that have baleen. And the baleen whales tend to be your humpbacks, blue whales, fin whales, minke whales, and so on. You know, you can get them coming into bays. That's not unusual. But I didn't know it was a Risso's dolphin, also known as a gray grampus. And they're an offshore species. And those toothed whales tend to be in much more tight-knit social units. So that's kind of a red flag when that happens. And in fact, the next day when they identified it as being a rissos, they found it dead on the beach. So it's important to know a bit more about what species you have that is getting in too close to shore. I mentioned my humpback visitor in Montreal came in summer 2020. One of my colleagues in Quebec said this was a gift to Montrealers because they had so much fun going out and looking for this whale, including my nephew. And it stayed around for a few days. From the photos and videos I saw, it seemed to be doing all right. It was breaching and so on. And then it looked like it had started to head back down river, but it was found dead, regretfully. They thought initially that it had been hit by a boat, but then they noticed that there was some extensive skin damage. So it was still not quite clear, even from the necropsy, what was the cause of death. So why do cetaceans, whales, dolphins, and porpoises strand? It's a really complex question, and we really have one answer, and that's we don't really know. There are a lot of theories that abound. You have to really look at them case by case by case. Yes, you can have animals that come into areas that they don't know. They might be getting lost, so maybe navigating errors, getting too close to shore. Sometimes you can have storms that ends up coming into unfamiliar waters. Case in point is Cape Cod Bay, which is a real hot spot for not only single strandings, but also for mass strandings. That is something that we can definitively talk about. A mass stranding is when you have a good number of whales that come in as a unit. And those are the toothed whales. You're not going to get baleen whales because baleen whales do not form the tight-knit social grouping that toothed whales do. And so you get these mass strandings with toothed whales, which tend to be more offshore animals coming into areas. And there are certain hotspots. I mentioned Cape Cod Bay is one of them. I'm going to mention New Zealand. I have a photo of New Zealand. So there's areas in the world that they're thinking from the bathymetry sort of ends up being a hotspot for them. You can have single strandings of both Adonocetes and Mysticetes. Mysticetes are the baleen whales. And again, you have to look at each case as to see what happened. And sometimes you just can't figure it out. So it's a very complex and mysterious kind of phenomenon, but it has been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. This is the New Zealand mass stranding I mentioned. And I was looking up other mass strandings for New Zealand, and they've had more since 2017. But you can see this is sort of what you think of as a mass stranding. You have all these whales, and to try and get them all off is an incredibly difficult job. I mean, some are already dead, but to work in and around them, they can start flailing. So it's a dangerous business. Among those, they were able to refloat a good number. Some washed back in dead, but others seemed to get out. So as they say, sometimes extreme weather, unusual ocean floor topography can make the whales navigate into waters that are too shallow to leave. And I think about Cape Cod, especially around Wellfleet, where those really shallow marshes. And if they get in there, that has been a really, really big hotspot for mass strandings. And that's why I look to my colleagues at IFA on Cape Cod if we ever had a mass stranding up our way. It's really rare, thank goodness, on our shores. This was a really interesting stranding, and it looks like a mass stranding. It sort of is, and it sort of isn't. These were sei whales, and a sei whale is a kind of baleen whale. And I just said baleen whales don't mass strand. But what they think went on, and this was in a really remote spot of Chile, Patagonia, and they think that all these sei whales died offshore, and perhaps currents just kind of loaded them all into shore. But they found hundreds of these carcasses. And they say primarily sei whales. I'm gathering some were just too decomposed to be sure if they were seis or fin whales, for example. And they attributed this to harmful algal blooms. So, disease or pollution, harmful algal blooms, these are all other reasons that whales can strand. What about these guys? What about seals? They're a totally different story. And I include this photo because I just love it. These are Lake Baikal seals in Russia. They're a freshwater seal. They're not found in the ocean. And it just shows these just beautifully plump little animals perched on what look really uncomfortable rocks. And that's just the height of comfort for them. They've got a nice thick blubber layer, especially these guys, so that they can just perch on these rocks. And you'll see them on our shores as well. So out of habitat for a pinniped, what does that look like? Because seals are semi-aquatic. They do get out of the water and they do spend a chunk of their life on land, on shore, on rocks, on docks, or what sometimes people's kayaks or boats. So that's not unusual. And I emphasize that because I get this a lot where people pick up seal pups and they plunk them back in the water. It's like, you have to be in the water. It's like, well, no, you don't. They are semi-aquatic. Now, granted, sometimes they do end up in weird spots like this. This is a harp seal adult in the lower left-hand corner. On the right is that seal that was at the entrance to Schoodic. That's a harp seal juvenile. And the reason they're called harp seals is as adults, they have what look like a lyre harp on their back. And that's the term for them. But there's other two seals. Those are harbor seals on the top. The top left is a full-term pup, has that nice adult, so-called adult coat. And the one on the right, which is absolutely adorable, is a little, looks like a little premature pup. It's wearing what's called a lanugo or birth coat. And they typically are not born with them. Is one of the characteristics that leads you to sort of believe that you may have a premature animal. And what's that big pink thing hanging out of it? It's not its intestines, it's its umbilicus, and it looks happy and healthy. Whoops, sorry. And that's always something we look for. And we often get people saying, I think we have the intestines hanging out. And I think, I don't think so. I did have a wonderful fellow fisherman phone me and he said, I've got this seal pup, I brought it home. He said, but I think it's got its intestines hanging out. I said, okay. I said, could you get a photo of that maybe? Like put gloves on, be very careful, get a photo and send that to me. Because now I get them, through my phone now, right? And he says, okay, I'll try and do that. And then he phoned back 5 minutes later, very chagrined, and said, my wife just got home and said, you don't need to be a marine biologist to know that that's the umbilicus. So I said, fair point. I said, can you put that seal back where you found it? Because he hadn't had it long. Some people bring them home, but if they have been home long, put them back where mom might find it and let us know if it's there later on. All right. So some things to consider though with seals, and there are lots of things. People always worry that they've troubled me for nothing. Oh, sorry, it was a wild goose chase getting you out here. No, it's not, because you can have a seal that looks really good and it sticks around and it sticks around. It's there for the next day, and then all of a sudden starts going downhill. So there may be something going on. So, but monitoring and observing for a good period of time is really important. And people sometimes don't understand why we aren't doing anything. And I'll say sometimes not doing anything is doing something, because we're giving that animal a chance to be with its mother. And if I just pick it up and take it to rehab, I can't find rehab spots for all the seals. It's just impossible. So let's give mom and pop the best chance going, because she's better, way better at this than we are. So. Okay, so location. Middle of the road is not good. Like there's another seal pup I'll be showing you later that was in the middle of the road. A health assessment. Clearly, if I have a really lethargic pup, and believe me, I've had them, they may have goopy eyes, they're breathing funny. There's just, I think most people can tell, they just feel they're looking crappy. Fair point. Is it entangled? Is it injured? And I have to say, seals can have injuries that look horrific to us, but they just get on with life and they can do just fine. Being in salt water is kind of helpful. And our veterinarian does a wonderful talk on wounds and wound healing in marine mammals. It's fascinating stuff. Wound healing is fascinating, but in marine mammals especially so. Age, I mentioned the premature, and we've got this little fella named Rufus. You'll be seeing some more pics of him later. He's my favorite harbor seal pup from back in, I think, 2005 or 6. is it a rare species? And there's two ways to look at rare. Is it rarely seen in your area, or is it an endangered species? We don't have any endangered species of seals here, but you may have a species that is rarely seen. And is it beyond its geographic range? And I give example from my hometown again in Montreal. We had the same summer as having the humpback. We had a bearded seal that decided the marina was just a great spot just off the island in north side of Montreal Island, and hung out for a while. And it's no big deal. It's a nice healthy seal. They can come upriver. They often do. And then it would just head back on down. So, but it is sort of out of its range. Bearded seals are an Arctic species. We did have one down in Gloucester, Massachusetts, a good number of years ago. And my colleague went to check on this seal that was deciding that it liked this dock. And she looked at the seal and she said, I have no idea what you are. And she had to look it up. It's because it was just one that we rarely see, even though it is an abundant species. And I'm waiting till we get a roll this down here, because which gives conniption fits to our stranding regional coordinator at NOAA. But they're just so iconic. And in Newfoundland, where I lived a good number of years, they've been seeing more and more of these guys coming down, more on the north side of Newfoundland, but always fascinating creatures. And vagrancy is the term used for those that sort of wander outside their geographic range. If someone didn't get the memo, so they went further afield. I put in this adult harp seal. It was an interesting case, a happy case, because this seal was just up in Bangor in the Penobscot River, and our colleagues at the Eastern Maine Medical Center had such fun with this seal. They kept an eye on it. They sent me photos and updates. They even had a slideshow going on in the hospital, and they named it Celia. And we don't know if it was a female. It kind of looks like it might have a baby bump. In March is when they do give birth. And we have had the odd one give birth down here in Maine, but they're typically more on the Labrador front off Newfoundland and Labrador. And it was there for a few days and then left. And we never saw it again, whether dead or alive. I'm glad we didn't find it dead. So I'm hoping it just scooted on back down. But it had its own little opening in the ice there, getting lots of fish, did really well. So nice, healthy looking seal. All right, so why do we respond to strandings in the first place? Why not just leave them be? Big catalyst for this is the Marine Mammal Protection Act of 1972. It was actually a remarkable piece of legislation that came about when Congress noted that with so many marine mammals being killed, being caught in as bycatch in fisheries, that they decided that they were great resorts of great international significance, aesthetic, recreational, et cetera, and that they should be protected. And so Congress passed this first legislation. And what was interesting about it, and really remarkable, it was an ecosystem approach, which we don't think, oh, well, yeah, sure, it would be an ecosystem approach. But back then, we thought more on you protect a species. We didn't think of the broader picture of a whole ecosystem, because if you're going to protect the species, you need to protect its habitat too, and the species that it feeds on, and so on and so forth. So this was the first such legislation to do this, and I think that's kind of cool. So, and we just had 50th anniversary last year. So there's some language in the Marine Mammal Protection Act that I'll get to in a sec, but basically is that you can't harm them, you can't kill them, you can't annoy them, you can't change the behavior, and it doesn't matter whether it's an abundant species of millions of them or one that's endangered, like the monk seals in Hawaii, for example. Some of the language in the MMPA, as we call it, are levels of harassment. You have level A and level B harassment. Level A harassment is the more severe, that you injured or you killed a marine mammal. The level B harassment is more that you bothered it. You changed its behavior, but if you keep bugging it again and again and again, that can end up killing it too, because you're stressing it out. We deal a lot more with the level B harassment, with people picking up seals well-meaning, putting them back in the water, maybe taking them home. I haven't had that in a while. We used to get a lot more where people will take seals home and plunk them in their bathtubs. But it's you know, it's taking away that potential bond with mom, if you know the mom is still there and nourishing that pup. So if you take the pup away, then it doesn't have a chance, and then it has to go to rehab. And remember, there's only so many rehab spots, so I don't want to take a perfectly healthy pup to rehab when then I get a call about one that really needs it. Another term that you'll see is a take, and this is a take. So it comes from the whaling days, where when you hunted whales, if you killed or even injured a whale, that was known as a take, and you had only so many takes that you could have. So it's just bothering. This is level B harassment right here, and it is a take. Selfies, this is the latest. And this is in California with some sea lions. We don't have sea lions on our coast, but here they are taking selfies, people getting in too close to these animals and getting bitten as well. NOAA has produced lots of various posters to help mitigate and give some outreach, good information, including kayakers. It's been interesting because we have a lot of kayaking around Bar Harbor, and I'm sure down here as well. Kayakers often will come near pupping ledges or seal ledges thinking I'm nice and quiet, I'm not going to disturb the animal because I'm a nice quiet vessel, but in fact you end up spooking them because you are so quiet. That's the paradox there. A noisy lobster boat, not a problem, but if that's what we ask kayakers to really keep your distance from any of the seal ledges, because they spook, they all go in the water, and they're hauled out for a reason, to rest, also when they're molting and when they're pupping. So it's important for them to get that rest on land. Part of the MMPA was the Marine Mammal Health and Stranding Response Program, which is lead agency is the National Marine Fisheries Service, with different components to that program. And the Marine Mammal Health and Stranding Response Program, it had its 30th anniversary just last year. So it has several components. Stranding networks I'm going to talk about in a sec. That's what we're a part of. Response investigations of mortality events. I might speak on that a little bit, and the rest you can read right there, but especially the stranding networks I'll get to in a sec. So what's really important is that, you know, why do we do this? Marine mammals are important. They're top predators in the ocean. They're feeding on food that we like to eat as well, if you're into seafood. So there can be that trickle down effect if there's something wrong. If we find that there's something untoward that's going on, that's signaling changes in the marine environment, that can have implications for the health of the population of those animals, but also for us as well. As I said, there's that trickle down effect. When we do get that sort of spatial and temporal die-off, it's known as an unusual mortality event. And currently we have 3 large whale, UMEs as we call them, for right whales, which has been ongoing for a few years, for humpback whales, which was enacted in 2016, and actually also minke whales, which that was enacted in 2017. There's various characteristics that have to be met by a committee that will then designate an unusual mortality event, and with that can come more funds to all of us stranding agencies to help with dealing with all the sampling protocols that we have to deal with. We also have had, you may have heard how last summer, an outbreak of avian influenza. It did affect seals, especially in southern Maine. This is this highly pathological avian influenza, or HPAI. We have had AI, avian influenza, in the past. It kind of recurs, but that had been low path. And we all know about different strains from COVID. Same with the avian influenza. So it afflicted southern Maine. My colleagues in southern Maine at the Marine Mammals of Maine had so many that were dying or sick and then died. So we had to start testing, and we do swabs, and we're all used to swabbing. I don't have to explain that anymore. So we were swabbing all our animals too, including ones out at Mount Desert Rock, because there were some gulls that looked pretty sick. And because we have a colony of seals out there, we worried about them as well. We did have a positive result, not from Mount Desert Rock, but from Winter Harbor, right across Frenchman Bay from Bar Harbor. My colleague Laura, whom I think is tuning in virtually, we went and with our student Reese did a necropsy right there. We did the swabs, and that animal tested positive, in fact. But that was the only one, and it seems to have dropped off. The last positive case was last July, but we still have to be vigilant. We're still swabbing because maybe that'll have another resurgence this summer. We don't know. So monitoring and studying marine mammal health is important for the conservation as well as maintaining healthy oceans, as I like to say, on an individual and a population and also an ocean scale. So the stranding network, which I did mention just briefly, we are a part of it. We're part of what's called the Greater Atlantic region. And we are, as Jack pointed out, from Virginia to Maine. And our own section of Maine is Rockland up to Calais, as I pointed out earlier. So we're part of the Marine Mammal Health and Stranding Response Program. We're a component of that. All the members, and what are we? I think we're 14 agencies. We've added on the Wampanoag tribe on Martha's Vineyard. So we're getting more letter holders. That's means that you have authorization from NOAA Fisheries to handle any dead or live marine mammal. And each what's called a stranding agreement used to be called a letter of authorization or an LOA, and they changed it to stranding agreement or an SA. And each one is a little different. We only do response. We don't do rehab. Some just do rehab and not response. Some do both. So each is a little different, but it gives us that authorization to handle marine mammals, which, as I said, under the MMPA would be illegal otherwise. We are mandated to complete what are called level A data forms, which is basic data. We also collect what's called level B and C data, and that would be samples, collecting tissue samples from the animals and getting them analyzed. So we perform necropsies on them when they're in good shape. We just did one Friday on a gray seal pup that came from Northeast Harbor. And of course, sampling is coupled in with that. And we at the college, in fact, we're the only academic institution left in the Greater Atlantic region now. And a big part of what we do is educating, and COA is renowned for its experiential learning. And there's nothing like having a bunch of students in and learning anatomy and physiology. And I had one student on Friday said, "This is my best day here." So it may sound odd, but I always say that, yes, the animals are dead, but we treat them with the utmost respect. And we like to give them a voice for what has happened to them. We don't always find cause of death, far from it, but we can see weird things that are going on inside, and sometimes not. We're left to ponder what happened to you. But it's absolutely fascinating, and there's nothing like hands-on to learn about anatomy and physiology and to give a voice. So the stranding network throughout the United States, as I said, the various regions, I think we've covered that. This is our region. That box sort of goes inland a bit, but we do get them coming up to Bangor. I had one in Brewer the other day. So there we are in Bar Harbor. That's sort of our area. If you could stretch out the fragmented coastline and all the islands, you're looking at roughly 2,600 miles or so. Marine Mammals of Maine look after the southern half, and our colleagues there at Buzzards Bay, Massachusetts, they do rehab. And so numerous animals of ours go there. Some will go to the Marine Mammals of Maine, but they get such a flood of animals of high volume in southern Maine because it's a greater population of people down there compared to up our way. So we will sometimes get them triaged and stabilized and then take them, transport them south to Massachusetts. All right, so who do we get? The pinnipeds, which are seals. There's the typical ones you've probably known and seen if you've been out on the water or on the shore, your harbor seals, gray seals, and with a nod to some of our ice seals on the right, the hooded seal and harp seal. There's the juvenile and the harp seal adult, where you see that lovely harp on its back. Beautiful animals. In terms of cetaceans we get here, the humpback, fin whale, northern right whale, minkies are the usual players. It doesn't mean we get these stranding, thank goodness. In fact, we rarely get, knock on wood, a large live whale stranding on shore. If anything, we'll get dead animals, and sometimes they're floating in and we have to get them in to do a necropsy if they're in good shape. And same for the smaller cetaceans. Sorry to have all these dead cetacean photos, but these are some of the strandings that we've had. Often a lot of harbor porpoise, common dolphin, Atlantic white-sided dolphin are some of the small cetaceans that we'll get. We've had the odd live small stranding, small cetacean strandings. I've had, I think, harbor porpoise, live harbor porpoise 3 times. We had a couple of Atlantic white-sides, a common dolphin, but it's rare when we get the live cetaceans on shore. And continuing, pilot whales, Rissos dolphin, that was the one that died. I threw in the beluga whale because that was a beluga named Poco who came down from Canada in around 2000, did I put a date? Something like 2005 or 6. It came down to Boston and worked its way up the shore. It seemed to like southern Maine a lot, which I was fine with. You stay down there. And it wasn't really a stranding, but it was a whale that was beyond its typical range, and we worried it would strand. So we were all pretty vigilant. I have a file that seriously is this thick on Poco. From calls, from newspaper articles, we had to do a lot of outreach to tell people to leave it alone. The thing was, this beluga liked coming to boats, and this is my photo in Northeast. It did come to our area. It came to Northeast Harbor, and it'll nuzzle up to the propellers of boats, which is not a really adaptive, good thing to do. It followed a sailboat to Provincetown and then came back. So it's just the behavior was kind of like it was stranded, just not what we'd expect. But you can get these Adonisites or toothed whales that we call solitary sociables. This is what Poco was. Sadly, he was around all that summer, but he was found dead in September. And of course, right away, we all thought he must have been hit by a boat, but it was natural causes, actually. So it was an interesting case. So I just thought I'd give a little nod to Poco. All right, our seals this summer, the gray seal and the harbor seal. Gray seals tend to be a bit more offshore. I know in Mount Desert Rock, we have a colony of both out there. They tend to be a little bit more offshore, but the harbors live up to the name, and we'll see them in the bay here. And of course, we all know about Andre the seal, famous. Differences between the two. Gray seals are just a bigger seal overall. Even the pups are bigger. They have more of a larger splotched pelage or fur compared to the sort of very small, even modeling on the harbor. I think the big thing is the profile. The gray seal has that longer nose compared to the more spaniel-like face of a harbor seal. And yes, harbors do have these really lovely heart-shaped nostrils. They really do when you look at them. And the grays have wider nostrils. It looks like a W. Just some of the little ways you can tell the difference. A nod to the ice seals. We don't tend to get them here in summer, although we were fooled one May. Actually, it was almost June. And someone on Swans Island, well, my colleague phoned me and said, oh, some people on Swans Island, they've got a harbor seal pup, they're bringing it in. And I was like, oh, can't they just leave it? And he said, no, they're on the ferry. They're on their way with the harbor seal pup. And I'm like, okay, fine. So I contacted our colleagues in rehab and they said they could take it. And so when they brought it to me, I was not in harp seal mode. I was in harbor seal mode because it's almost June and we never get harps at this time. And this seal looked like a harbor seal pup, got into the carrier, but I remember thinking it was a little snappy in attitude and a little bit bigger. And when I got to Belfast, because I had to pick up another harbor seal, I looked in the back to show the harbor master our other harbor seal, and it had dried out. And when it dried out, it revealed the uneven splotches and the silvery fur. And I looked down, I said, "You're not a harbor seal. You are a harp seal," which means you are weaned, you're not a pup, you're just a youngster, but you don't need anything. So I contacted my colleague and I said, "I only have one harbor seal for you, not two." And so we actually gave some fluids to the harp seal to give it a boost, and then sent it on its merry way. We can, having said all that, we can get hooded seals here in summer. They're an interesting species. They're an Arctic seal, but they're a real wanderer. And sometimes you'll get a pulse of them in summer. I remember having 4 one July, and then they were gone. So it's something to think about, that you can get hoodeds in summer. But these are the usual suspects, and these little guys are coming. In fact, some are already here. I know my colleagues in Southern Maine already have one in rehab. These 2 little fellas, they're not twins. They're from separate moms, but they like to hang out together. And this lovely little pair was at a dock just, forget where they were, just north of Bar Harbor. So a little bit about harbor seal basics. Phocoviculina is the scientific name. You can read all the stats there, but basically they get up to about 4 to 5 feet, a little bit smaller than the gray seals that can get quite a size on them, which I'll show you in a sec. The little fella down there on the lower right is a pup. It's a full-term pup, that nice adult coat, doesn't have the preemie, and I'll show you the lanugo on another pup later. This was a weaned pup, and that was my introduction to the attitude of weaned pups. They're not happy because mom has left them, but it looks really sweet. And I thought, "Oh, you're so cute. You've been there a few days." It was in some estate on Indian Point and Mount Desert Island. So I went to pick it up and it wanted to bite me, and I wouldn't blame it, but it just had this really snappy attitude. And that's sort of one of the characteristics of the weaned pup. Where did the range for harbor seals? They have them in the Pacific as well. And when I was in Scotland, they have them in Scotland, North Sea, and so on. So you can see there the range. They're not found in the Southern Hemisphere. And I love this. As I mentioned, the Lake Baikal seal, that's not a harbor seal, that's a separate species. But there are some freshwater harbor seals. And in Alaska, up in Bristol Bay, there's this small population, which I think these photos are really incredible, showing sort of drone views of harbor seals on ice. I always think they're harp seals because that's how I imagine those seals to be, but not harbors, because I'm so used to them in summer here. And as well, my home province of Quebec, there's a harbor seal. They're found in a series of lakes about 250 kilometers east of Hudson Bay. So it's a whole series of lakes. And they're harbor seals, but they're freshwater. And not a whole lot is known about them. And you can tell because they say that their size can be anywhere from 50 to 600. They really don't know. So I've been kind of intrigued to go up there, but not exactly a lot of roads going up that way. Some pupping basics. Okay, pups, the harbor seal pups are born basically now, but in earnest more to the end of May into early June. They're about 2.5, 2 to, I'd say just under 3 feet at birth. I'd say more like 2 feet, the little peanuts we get. So they weigh around 8 to 12, so that's kids, 17 to 26 pounds at birth, if they're nice and healthy. They nurse for about 4 to 6 weeks. So when we hit, they're born in mid-May and then to mid-June. At the end of June, my colleagues and I are like, "Oh, good, it's almost July." what that means is that people, if they phone and go, there's a harbor seal pup, it doesn't have a mom, we can say, no, it doesn't, because mom's done her job, she's gone. And like, oh, so that's a weaned pup. We get into that season, it's just a little bit easier. The other part of that is that if that seal is hanging around a very busy dock, a very busy area, I can safely relocate it anywhere. I don't have to be, moving it just, 100 yards because I'm worried mom won't find it. When it's a weaned pup, mom is gone, then I can take it and put it further from the very busy area. We did have a seal pup in Southwest Harbor, Mount Desert Island. It's the community boating club. And they had this lovely dock that was sort of low to the water and had some carpeting so the kids could bring their little skiffs out onto it. Well, this little harbor seal decided this is the best, it's carpeted, easy to get on and off. And we had to relocate that animal 3 times. It kept coming back, so they named it Boomerang. We thought we'd removed it and put it in a different spot because it was a weaned pup. And then the yacht club would phone us, or the community boating club would phone us and say, it's back. And but then we had to really remove it. And finally that did it. And I'll just go back. That was an interesting photo taken by our interns, probably just off Mount Desert Rock somewhere, of mom and her pup. So this is sort of what we get if it's not a preemie. We like to see that nice full-term coat, this sort of the gray, which when they get older, you can see more of the modeling. You don't see that so much when they're this size. Nice clear eyes, yes, often have an umbilicus. Hopefully it's sort of pink and nice looking and happy. That can be a route for infection, so we're really vigilant about that when we do take them in to stabilize. And I should point out, we may not do rehab, but we can hold overnight. We have that authorization, and that apparently is going to be increased by NOAA. It allows us to stabilize them a bit more before they do a transport to rehab. But when we do take them in and give them fluids several times during the course they're with us, we look to that umbilicus, maybe put some betadine on it just to make sure everything's okay. That will just reabsorb, it just falls off after a week or so. Just a few critters. You can see the number there may be a reference number, or it's number that goes with that animal. It's just a field number. We call it an accession number. It goes with the animal. We had this little fellow in Lincolnville. He's sporting a nice Lanugo coat, and he did go into rehab, should point out. And this is a video clip because the pup, there's a few things to point out to you. You'll hear him suckling. He's suckling on the rockweed and rock. They will suckle on everything because that's the stage they're at. I've had them suckle on the cage when I've been transporting them to rehab. It's sort of this, you can hear them going at it. The other thing is you can see some of the Lanugo coat is coming off. You can still see it on the back, that fluffy white, but you can see the full-term coat emerging underneath. And I'll just play this because it's just cute. Is there sound on it?
Maybe it was turned down.
Sorry about the wind. Our veterinarian, Carissa, and myself, we did collect that pup when it went to rehab. We jokingly called it Fluffy. It's sort of an old joke between us, but he did very well in rehab. Oops. Okay, on to the next one.
So
Gray
is
seals.
Mother just like not there, or
Well, the moms go off to feed.
uh,
Yeah, it's interesting. There are some seal species where they're invested in that pup, they stay there. I was in South Georgia near Antarctica, if you know the story of Shackleton, South Georgia. Amazing place, go if you can. And the southern elephant seals were there with their pups. They don't go, they stay there the whole time. So they invest in building up their blubber reserves so that they can just stay put and pump out milk, because they're going to lose a lot of weight because they're putting it all into that pup, which is important to do. And then they'll get their break and off they go. Southern elephant seals are really incredible. Deep divers are crazy. And so, yeah, there's different strategies. For harbor seals, you know, they're saying that, oh yeah, the harbor seals stay with their pups. They don't. We find they go off to feed. We see this a lot. And the harbor seal pups can swim, and you'll see my very last video clip at the end shows a pup, a healthy little guy. They can swim right away. Some seals don't or can't as well, but harbor seals can. Some will go with mom to feed, but it does get tiring. They are babies after all, and probably gets a bit boring because you're still nursing and trying to figure out what mom is doing. So, but yeah, and that's the tough part. Believe me, we go through a lot trying to figure out when is it time to pull this animal. I've pulled animals thinking, oh gosh, maybe we should have left it a bit longer. And then we get it to rehab and they say, no, good call, Rosie. And then other times we leave it too long. It's really tough. They can mask so much. Wild animals will mask a lot. So they don't make your life easier. And of course, a lot depends on rehab space. So there's a lot to work through. Gray seals, they're sort of interesting in that you can tell whether male, female from the coloration. If they're dark with light spots, they're male, and the reverse for female. Although I have to say, I've had some where I look at them and go, you could flip flop either way. And some are like that. But those ones you can see a little more dramatically that they're male and female. Halicoeris gripus, there is sexual dimorphism with these. The male is bigger quite a bit than the female. You don't see that so much with harbor seals. So you can get the adult female, almost 7 feet, the adults a good almost 11 feet. And if you come to the Dorr Museum of Natural History on the COA campus, they have a taxidermied adult male gray seal. And wow, it's huge. That was one big gray seal. These are winter babies. They're not born in spring. They're born in the winter between December, between December and February. We had a few pups this year, which we love. They have such attitude. I just love those guys. Like this little fella right here. They are born with a lanugo coat, and that would make sense. You're born in winter, better to have that second fur coat on. But then they start to lose it, and you can see the little fella on the far lower right. He's vestiges of that white lanugo still on his flippers. It always seems to be the flippers that are like the end notes for the lanugo. It's as if they're wearing little socks that they're hanging onto. That little gray seal was gone later. And gray and harbor seal range is kind of interesting. And I'm just putting this up here to show the gray seals are only found North Atlantic, including the North Sea and so on. But it's not a seal that you'll get in the Pacific Ocean. You can see there is the cross hatching is where you'll find both grays and harbors. So a few things to keep in mind. I've already touched on some of it. Yes, seals, not sea lions, but seals could be awkward on land because they are. As I said, it's something that people will say to us. The animal looks in distress, and when we get right down to it, it's because it's dragging the hind flippers. So you can assure them that this is naturally how they are ambulatory on land as best they can, but it does look awkward. But put them in the water and they use those hind flippers to help steer and propel and so on. So it's like a ballet if you see these guys in water. They will vocalize a lot. We get people saying that the pups are crying. Well, they're vocalizing, and that's how mom knows her pup is from its distinct. It may not sound distinct to you and me, but it is to mom. It's sort of like if with your child in a crowded room, you'll know your child's call or cry. So they do vocalize, but as I said, the public can interpret that as distress. Probably just means they're hungry and I wish mom would come back. And there again is the mom coming back that we have to monitor and see what's happening. Small amounts of blood from minor abrasions. We put that in because I remember having a harp seal north of, oh gosh, where was it? Addison or someplace. And the woman called one evening and said, "You got this seal and it's bleeding." And I've learned with when you get it's bleeding, I'll say, "Are we looking at drops of blood or are we hemorrhaging everywhere?" And she said, "Hemorrhaging everywhere." I said, "Fair enough, I'll be coming up." I came up, here's the seal on the ice, quite happy. What it had done, it had a few little minor abrasions, but had spread the blood over the ice. There's nothing like blood on ice, it's just dramatic. It really stands out. So this was not a really injured seal, but you do a lot of great outreach and they were fantastic. And the newspaper even wrote an article about the seal. I forget what they named it, but it was a harp seal juvenile. And so great connections. That's what I love, doing that, talking to people. Often when I have people reporting seals or any of the animals, they'll often come to our training workshops and become volunteers as well. So seals don't need to be wet. People want to pour water on them, especially those pups. I had a woman on shore calling me right from the shore and said, "We're just about to pour water on the seal." And I said, no, you're going to stress it out. It does not need to be wet. And then she screamed at the person down the beach, "Don't pour water on the seal." They can dry out, that's fine. They're not whales. That'd be a different story, but seals, they don't need to be wet. They don't need to be in salt water, as I can test from those freshwater seals. So a normal seal, you want nice clear eyes, and they have those wonderful luminous eyes, incredible. They may or may not have what we call hydration rings, and I'll show you what that looks like in a sec. You want an animal that's bright, alert, responsive, aware that you're there. I've had some that look flat demeanor, lethargic, flat down on the beach, just could care less that you're there. But this one is certainly looking at you. No visible wounds or scars. Of course, you look for that too. Good body condition. We kind of look nice plump. We don't want to see concavity in the neck or hips. That's not a bad thing, but you don't want that to start going too far and become really emaciated. In fact, one thing with weanling pups is that weight does drop off. That's kind of a natural thing. They've been pumped up with mom's milk. Now mom's like, "I'm done." And those weanling pups do have a weight drop off. But they should get with the program and start building up that blubber layer and that body condition. Banana pose. It's a term we use for lying on the side. They kind of raise the head and hind flippers, and they kind of look like a smile or a banana. We say the banana pose. It's kind of a happy, relaxed pose, but I've had so many people say, "I think it's hurt its flipper." And so again, you kind of gently dig in and sort of figure out what's going on. And they say, "Well, it's lying on its side." I'm like, "Okay, it's got its head up and flippers up." I said, "That sounds pretty good." So the banana pose is that kind of nice, happy pose, as I call it. And there's a seal showing the hydration rings. It just looks like almost raccoon eyes. Careful with that one too, because I know my colleagues that do rehab have had seals where they gave tons of fluids and they did not have hydration rings. And they've also had the opposite. But it's sort of a nice, it's something we do look for. And in fact, we had just given fluids to that pup whom I called Mr. Wriggles, because he was just that, Mr. Wrigley, and he did very well in rehab and was released. Normal seal behavior, I mentioned lying aside, stretching hind flippers, that's fine. I've had people think they're in convulsions, stretching the hind flippers. I said, no, that's just stretching. Scratching, using the front flippers. Again, moving on land, using only those front flippers, vocalizing. The pup nursing on itself, as you saw. Another thing you can get is behavior called bottling. And seals will lie vertical in the water with the head up, and it looks like the profile of a bottle. And they might be snoozing, resting, but we get calls that, worry that the seal isn't going anywhere, that it's probably entangled and it can't move. And it's, I often bring up that, well, they do a behavior called bottling. Finish up with some cetacean cases and some harbor seal cases. Sorry for the really decomposed whales, but this is what we deal with. Some decomposed, some not so decomposed. This was last summer with a minke whale with some linear marks that were suggestive of entanglement. And so we did a lot of sampling with our crew. This was a humpback whale up in Boot Cove. I get to see some really amazing places along this coastline. Boot Cove, and it was interesting because the bathymetry there, you're almost in the Bay of Fundy and in Lubeck. And we couldn't get it closer into shore because the drop off there was so severe. And the currents, I got tossed into the brink. I had waders on and it just pulled me under. So it makes down East Maine is certainly fun to work in. The cobbled beaches and the tides that we have to deal with that are so dramatic. But from that, we get as much as we can, keeping safety in mind with our crew. We want to get basic data, like obviously we know it's a humpback whale, and we were trying to get a straight length. That's why we're wading out into the water. And if you can get some skin samples for genetics, that's another thing you can do too. This is the COVID summer 2020. I had a very nice couple who took me out in their boat. I tried to be masked, but you're out in the open air, so that was a good thing. Very decomposed whale. Again, working on our shores is not the easiest. I sort of envy Cape Cod or Southern Maine with these long sandy beaches, but we have rockweed, uneven cobbles, so it's you really have to be careful working around them. Right whale calf, getting samples really critical when we get a dead right whale. Of course, we don't want a dead right whale, but this was a calf as well, and it was a human interaction case because it was killed by propeller. And I'm leaning over getting samples for histology for the pathologist. And this was a large humpback whale near Roke Island, I think it was. Does it say? Great Spruce Island up north, down east. And interestingly, well, they're the flukes right there. And I showed you how we can identify humpbacks based on the patterns, but it's so decomposed, it's just sort of looks like blubbery mess there. But from genetics, they were able to identify it to a humpback whale that we know that was named Kilter. Minke whale on Sand Beach. This call came in on it was August, I think it was like a Sunday afternoon, and NOAA Fisheries called me and I said, oh, how are you doing? She's, I'm fine, but you may not be after this call. I'm like, what's up? Well, we got a dead whale on Sand Beach. And if you know Acadia National Park, you know that Sand Beach is our very popular beach to be. And this whale had come up. But when, you get lemons, you make lemonade, and people were absolutely fascinated. And of course, we did a ton of outreach. You can see some of the crew there, and we actually towed it off with the help of everyone on the beach. And the next day we got a line and we had to tow it away from some rocks, and then the boat took it around to the next cove, which was Otter Cove. And then we did the necropsy. We had an area that was roped off, keeping it safe. But we had all kinds of materials showing pictures of what the whale looked like, when it was alive, talking about minke whales and conservation and so on. So we always try and make it an event that does a lot of outreach. It's really important to do so. This was a sad case. Popular humpback whale named Spinnaker was found dead. It was funny because, well, not so funny, but 2 days earlier, I'd had a call about a large dead whale. It turned out to be a dead sei whale up north or further up north. And so when they called and said there's a dead whale, it was like, oh, no, we've been to that one. And they said, well, this one's off Great Head in Acadia National Park. I said, they think it's a humpback, which it was. Spinnaker is a well-known female seen by the whale watch boats especially the northern Gulf of Maine, and identified her that evening. We got photos of her flukes. I didn't include some of them there, but the waves would keep picking up her flukes, and I managed to snap the right tip of her tail, and I matched that to the catalog of humpback whales. And it was kind of sad to discover that, and I was hoping I was wrong, and I sent the photos to my colleagues and said, tell me I'm wrong. And they said, no, that's Spinnaker, which is very sad because she'd been entangled at least 5 times based on scarring, but also my colleagues at the Center for Coastal Studies in Provincetown, which do the disentanglement work. They are the ones authorized to do that. They disentangled her 3 times. And my buddy Scott, who directs the program there, was terribly upset, obviously. And so we brought her in. We did a very careful necropsy. I think I've got shots where we brought her in. We're doing all the exam. We spent the Sunday doing a very careful external exam and also a lot of sampling. And then the following day, we did the big necropsy. We kept her skeleton because my colleague Dan Danto of Whales and Nails, as he calls it, not only builds houses, but he builds whales. So he's a master at articulating skeletons, and he's got numerous ones. If you go to Harvard, you'll see a couple there, New Bedford Whaling Museum, Glacier Bay National Park, and so on. She is articulated, and if you ever go to the Center for Coastal Studies in Provincetown, we felt it was right that she should go there, even though we're the ones that see her up here. But for my buddy Scott and the others there that did so much work to try and help her, that she would have a home with them. Okay, some harbor seal cases. I love these little plump little peanuts on the shore. They're just a riot. And this was a lovely little one at the Atlantic Boatyard. We'd already had one at the Atlantic Boatyard that we did have to take to rehab because it insisted on being on the slipway. And when I went to get it, there was boats lined up being launched, and they were just waiting for me to get there because they couldn't, they're not allowed to touch the animal. So they were very patient. I got to hand it to them. And so we removed that pup, and then we heard they had another one a few days later. But this little guy was off on a beach separately, and he looked really good. And he was gone the next day. So, and some wonderful people there were keeping an eye out too. So there's Rufus, my favorite little pup. That was Blue Hill in 2005. This was a premature pup. He's got the lanugo coat, which again, gray seals are naturally born with that in winter. These guys that are born in spring really don't need that extra fur coat. But Rufus did have a complete lanugo, and we did take him into rehab. And when he dried out, he's just a fluff ball, and he likes the stuffed animal. I find that when they're weanlings, they don't really like the stuffed animals so much. They kind of get snappy with them. But when they're youngsters like this, they kind of like having, you can even just roll up a towel, and that does the job too. So this little fella went to rehab. They just loved him. He did very well and was released. Again, that was a good number of years ago now. And the little tag, that's just to identify, because when you have like 10 of them in a pool, you need to get the right amount of fish to them and also any meds if they're getting any. So they have that little tag, and that comes off in the molt. So they won't be wearing that all their lives, even though it's pretty innocuous. It's just kind of epoxied on. This little guy was in, I think it was in Surrey back in 2018, and it's just a little video. And one thing, I don't know if you've noticed that some of these pups or harbor seals are different colors, and you could think that they're a different species, but harbor seals really have wide variety of colors. Sort of the dark morph is a little more rare. It's usually sort of the gray or the browns that you see, but they come in really quite a wide variety of colors. So you'll see that. Also, just notice how this little guy moves on land. It looks awkward, and you'll hear him or her vocalizing as well. And it is one we collected for rehab. Whoops, come back. I gotta remember to do that properly. saying, Rosie, give me something to eat. This little guy was a good time. This was 2017, and we got a call about a seal pup on the bar. If you've been to Bar Harbor, you know we have the famous bar, hence the name Bar Harbor, to Bar Island. And when the tide is out, everyone's out on the bar going to Bar Island. And on one part of the bar, and it's a really wide bar actually, but everyone sort of takes the main thoroughfare. But off to one side, thankfully, was this little fella. In fact, a woman was walking by. She didn't see me there. She was all plugged in, and we were trying to warn her that there's a seal pup, don't stand on it. And she didn't hear us, and we realized, yeah, she's got her headphones on. She just sallied right on by that pup. She didn't even notice it because they so blend in. They don't blend in on the sandy beaches in southern Maine, but our beaches, I have more calls with people saying, I almost stepped on the seal, or my dog found it. I would never have seen it. So they're very cryptic. So there he is. The next day or so, it had come around the corner up West Street to what was called the Seacoast Mission. It's now the Bar Harbor Historical Society. And it was often, it's kind of an inlet there, sort of a river, and goes under the road to the other side of Route 3. And it was like, okay, we'll just keep an eye on this little guy. And because it was right down from the college, it was easy for students to go down and check on it. It was good practice for them. Then on my birthday at 5 in the morning, I always have harbor seals pups on my birthday. I got a call from the police department. I happened to be up anyway because I already had 2 seal pups that we'd held overnight. So I knew I was transporting 2 pups to rehab. So that's why I was up at 5 in the morning. But then we get a call that this seal pup, same pup, because we could identify it from its markings, it had crossed the road, and we don't know if it sort of took the conduit underneath or came over the road. Suffice it to say, it was in the middle of the road, and you can see the police department there. They kindly babysat until one of our students got there and quickly snatched it up out of the little ditch there and got it back to the college, where we had 3 seal pups to tube feed with fluids and get them into the vehicle. And I trundled them all the way down to rehab. Went to the National Marine Life Center. Here he's with a bunch of other buddies that we brought there. National Marine Life Center, wonderful folks there in Buzzards Bay, Mass. Their naming theme that summer were celebrities. It got a little awkward, some trying to say these names. Anyway, this was Rosalind Franklin, if you know Rosalind Franklin, and DNA fame. So that was her with her little buddies. And there she is in the big girls pool, going through the whole process of rehab, which takes for the pups about 3 months. You got to teach them everything, including that fish is food once they're weaned. And there she is saying, feed me, which you can see they try and maintain a distance, try not to equate people with food. You don't want a seal pup crawling on the beach to someone with a red bucket thinking you've got food. And then she was released and went home, which I'm trying to imagine if when you do rehab, you must get so attached to some of them that it must be kind of hard when you've been working with them for like 3 months. And finally, I'll just end up with this lovely fella that the lobster woman Sarah had phoned me about and said, I think it looks pretty good. Here's a photo. And I thought, yeah, it does. And I went down to have a look because I was curious. And that was nice to see healthy pups. And this was close by. It was in Tremont on the backside of the island. So just finish up with this little guy. You can see how they can swim quite well right away. sometimes these little guys do get tired, and I've had calls from kayaking companies, especially in Bar Harbor, saying seal hauled out on our kayak. They've done that a few times. He's not far from shore. I'm on a dock right there with lobster pots next to me, so. And I will point out that this is a seal in habitat, and our authorization, I couldn't just go in and pick that seal out of the water and take it to rehab. It has to be on shore. So it's all about being out of habitat, even though, once again, for a seal, that's got a gray area.
What if the seal is very clearly very injured, but technically in habitat,
Yeah,
or like stuck in something?
what we have to do in those circumstances is get in touch with NOAA Fisheries and just say, this is what we've got. I think it needs to come in. I can see this injury. And they'll give you the okay to do that. But it's sort of, don't willy-nilly just grab them because you think you can. It's still in habitat, and we know they can deal with all kinds of injuries. It's really remarkable. And I know that with whales. Some of the injuries I've seen on whales are incredible. Massive scarring from boat strikes or what have you, and survived. Yeah. And that is it.
Thank
Thank you.